Meet Kit, an American Girl. Written by Valerie Tripp. Chapter 1. Good News. Click, click, clickety. Kit Kitteridge smiled as she typed. She loved the sound the typewriter keys made as they struck the paper, and the ping of the bell when she got to the end of a line. She loved the inky smell of the typewriter ribbon, and the way the black letters looked as they marched across the page, telling a story the way she wanted it told. It was a hot afternoon in August. Kit and her best friend Ruthie were in Kit's room, writing a newspaper for Kit's dad. Kit was not a very good typist. She used only her 2 pointer fingers, and she made a lot of mistakes, which she had to XXXXX out. But Dad never minded. Every night when he came home from work, he gave Kit the real newspaper so that she could read the headlines and the baseball scores and the funnies. He was always very pleased when Kit gave him one of her newspapers in return. Kit finished the paragraph she was typing. "Read me what we have so far," said Ruthie. Kit cleared her throat and read. "Ruthie Smithens and Kit Kittredge are reading lots of books this summer. Ruthie has read the Blue, Yellow, XXX, and Red Fairy books by Andrew Lang. She is now reading the Lilac Fairy book. I am interested in princes and princesses, so I like fairy tales," said Ruthie. "Kit Kittredge is reading The Adventures of Robin Hood and His Merry Men. I like the way Robin Hood tricks the bad guy, the Sheriff of Nottingham," said Kit, "and the way he robs rich people and gives their money to poor people. I think it would be great to live in XXX Sherwood Forest." "That's good," said Ruthie when Kit finished reading. "I like it." "Me too," said Kit. "What should we write about now?" "Write about Charlie and the cookies," said Ruthie. Charlie was Kit's brother, who was 16. Kit thought a moment. Then she typed, "Congratulations to Charlie Kittredge. He set a world's record today. He ate a whole plate of ginger snaps that were supposed to be for Mother's Garden Club. Charlie is going to college in a few weeks. He should try out for XX, the eating team." Ruthie looked over Kit's shoulder and giggled as she read what Kit had written. "Now what?" she asked. Kit picked up a pencil and put it behind her ear so that she would look like a newspaper reporter. "Well," she said, "we could write about how hot it is." Ruthie nodded, quickly at first, then slower and slower. Finally she let her chin fall to her chest, closed her eyes, and pretended to snore. "You're right," said Kit. "Weather is boring. There aren't any people in it. This is supposed to be a newspaper, not a snooze paper." "You could write about how your mother redecorated your room," Ruthie said. "I think it's as pretty as a princess's room, don't you?" Answered Kit with a crooked smile. "It's okay. It's just a little too pink for me. I'd rather sleep in a treehouse, like Robin Hood." Ruthie shook her head. "You're crazy," she said. "Yep," said Kit cheerfully. She knew Ruthie was right, of course. Her room was pretty. Mother had redecorated it for her earlier that summer as a surprise. And, as with everything Mother did, it was lovely. Kit's room was painted a pale pink with white trim. There was a canopy bed as high and white and fluffy as a cloud, and a dressing table with a lacy skirt around it. The desk was white and spindly-legged. It looked too delicate to hold the big black typewriter that crouched on it. Mother had asked Kit to keep the typewriter in the closet, please, and take it out only when she used it. But Kit always forgot to put the typewriter away. Besides, she used it a lot. The typewriter ended up being on the desk all the time, even though it looked out of place in the frilly room. Kit squirmed on the poofy stool that had replaced her old swivel chair. She believed in telling the truth straight out. But so far, she hadn't told Mother that she felt as out of place in the frilly room as the typewriter looked. Mother was so pleased with all the lacy pinkness, and so sure that the room was a girl's dream. Which it probably is, Kit admitted to herself. Just not mine. The redecorating story's no good because Dad knows all about it, she said to Ruthie. It's not new. Kit sighed. I wish something would happen around here. Some dramatic change. Then we'd have a headline that would really grab Dad's attention. Like in the real newspapers, said Ruthie. Exactly, said Kit. I don't know, said Ruthie. When my parents read the headlines these days, they get worried. The news is always about the Depression, and it's always bad. I don't think we want our paper to be like that. No, said Kit. We want good news. She knew there hadn't been much good news in the real newspapers for a long time. The whole country was in a mess because of the Depression. Dad had explained it to her. About 3 years ago, people got nervous about their money and stopped buying as many things as they used to, so some stores had to close down. The people who worked in the stores lost their jobs. Then the factories that made the things the stores used to sell had to close down, so the factory workers lost their jobs too. Pretty soon, the people who'd lost their jobs had no money to pay their doctors or house painters or music teachers, so those people got poorer too. Kit was glad that her dad still had his job at the car dealership. She and Ruthie knew kids at school whose fathers had lost their jobs. They'd seen those fathers selling apples on the street corners, trying to earn a few cents a day. Some kids had disappeared from school because their families didn't have enough money to pay the rent anymore, and they had to move. Dad said the Depression was like a terrible slippery hole. Once you fell in, it was almost impossible to get out. Kit knew the Depression was getting worse all the time because the newspaper headlines said so almost every night. But inside Kit's house, no dramatic changes where the headlines seemed to be happening. The girls were about to give up on finding any news, good or bad, when Charlie popped his head in the door. Hey, girls, he said. Mother's Gardens Club's here. You'd better get downstairs quick if you want anything to eat. I saw Mrs. Culver already diving headfirst into the nut dish. Thanks for telling us, Charlie, said Kit. Oh, boy, said Ruthie. Maybe there'll be some cake for us. Maybe there'll be some news for us, said Kit. She grabbed her notebook and took the pencil from behind her ear. Come on. Kit and Ruthie thundered down the stairs. They slowed their steps in the hallway so that they wouldn't sound, as Mother always said, like a herd of stampeding elephants. Mother liked things to be just so when the garden club ladies came. She brought out all her best crystal, china, silver, and linen, and arranged her most beautiful plants on the terrace where the ladies met. Kit could hear the ladies' voices and the clink of their iced tea glasses out on the terrace now. Above all the other voices, Kit heard Mrs. Wolf complimenting Mother. Margaret, Mrs. Wolf was saying, your sponge cake is perfection. Mine is just that, a sponge. Mrs. Wolf hooted at her own joke before she went on. Please give me your recipe. I'd be glad to, said Mother, just as Kit and Ruthie stepped onto the terrace. Mother looked as cool and slender as a mint leaf in her pale green dress. Kit wanted to fling herself at Mother and hug her, but she held herself back. Her fingers had typewriter ink on them. It would never do to leave ink stains on Mother's perfect green dress. Mother smiled when she saw the girls. Then she turned to her guests and said, Ladies, you remember Ruth Ann Smithens and my daughter Kit, don't you? Yes, of course, said the ladies. Hello, girls. Hello, said Kit and Ruthie politely. Do help yourself to some refreshments, girls, said Mother. We will, said Kit and Ruthie, smiling broadly. The girls filled their plates and retreated to a corner behind a potted palm to enjoy their feast and observe the ladies. At first the ladies discussed garden club business, such as how to get rid of bugs, slugs, and other garden pests. It was pretty boring, although the girls did get giggly when Mrs. Wilmore said she was just beside herself because she had spots on her phlox. Then the talk moved on to who was going to weed the flower bed at the hospital, which the garden club ladies took turns doing. "I believe it is my turn," said Mrs. Howard, "but I'm afraid I won't be able to weed this month. In fact—" She hesitated and blinked her big round eyes. "I'm afraid I won't be part of the garden club at all anymore." Kit and Ruthie looked at each other and raised their eyebrows. This sounded interesting. Why would Mrs. Howard be quitting the garden club? Kit leaned forward so that she could hear better. There may be a story in this for our newspaper, she thought. All the ladies murmured that they were sorry, and Mother said, "Oh, Louise, that's too bad." "Well," said Mrs. Howard, "I'm moving to Chicago. My husband is already there, and so my son Sterling and I are going to join him. He's pursuing a business opportunity." "Ah," said all the ladies brightly. They all knew what that meant. Kit did too. It meant that Mr. Howard had gone to Chicago to look for a job. Everyone knew that Mr. Howard had not had a job for 2 years, ever since the company he worked for here in Cincinnati had gone out of business. "Where will you live in Chicago?" a lady asked. "I'm not sure yet," said Mrs. Howard, blinking again. "Mr. Howard hasn't settled anywhere. We'll be hither, thither, and yon for a while." The ladies smiled, but Kit saw little lines of concern on their faces. The whole thing sounded pretty fishy to Kit. If the Howards have no place to live in Chicago, why are they leaving their house in Cincinnati, she wondered. Then suddenly it dawned on her. The Howards couldn't stay in their house. They didn't have enough money anymore. And Mr. Howard didn't have a job or a place for them to live in Chicago either. That was the truth. Kit was sure of it. She was pretty sure that all the ladies knew it too, but no one would say it out loud. There was an awkward silence. Then Mother spoke up and made everything better. "I have a marvelous idea, Louise," she said to Mrs. Howard. "We'd love it if you and dear Sterling would stay in our guest room until your husband is settled in Chicago and sends for you. Sterling is about Kit's age. I'm sure they'll get along beautifully." Ruthie nudged Kit, but Kit held her finger to her lips to signal Ruthie not to say anything. The ladies turned toward Mrs. Howard, waiting anxiously for her answer to Mother's invitation. "Well," said Mrs. Howard slowly, "if you're sure it isn't too much trouble, Sterling and I would love to stay. Thank you, Margaret." "It's all settled then," said Mother calmly. All the ladies brightened up, as if a cloud had blown away. Kit started scribbling notes on her notepad, and Ruthie whispered to her, "Who's this boy Sterling?" Kit shrugged. "He's Mrs. Howard's son, I guess," she said. "I haven't met him." "You will," said Ruthie. "He's going to be living in your house." "Looks like it," said Kit. She liked the idea. Boys were always up to something. Sterling was sure to be a good source of stories for her newspaper for Dad. And it would be nice to have a boy around, especially after Charlie left for college. She and Sterling could play catch together. They could talk about the Cincinnati Reds baseball team, which Kit loved and Ruthie, quite frankly, didn't care about. And Sterling could join in when she and Ruthie acted out stories from the books they read. Kit grinned at Ruthie. "When we play Robin Hood, Sterling can be the Sheriff of Nottingham," she said. "Boys like to be the bad guy." Ruthie had a big bite of cake in her mouth. She swallowed, then grinned back at Kit. "Well," she said, "you never know. Sterling might rather be Prince Charming and perform good deeds." "He's already done one good deed," said Kit. "What?" asked Ruthie. "Come on," said Kit. "I'll show you." The two girls slipped back inside the house and ran up the stairs to Kit's room. Kit stood in front of the typewriter. "Sterling's given us a headline," she said to Ruthie. "Look." Kit typed in capital letters, "The Howards are coming." Chapter 2. Read all about it. Kit's real name was Margaret Mildred Kittredge. She was named after her mother and an aunt of her dad's. But when she was very little, her dad used to sing her a song that went like this. Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, boys, smile. It was a song he'd learned when he was a soldier fighting in the Great War. Kit loved it. She'd beg Dad, "Sing my song! Sing the Kit song!" Pretty soon, everyone began to call her Kit, which was also short for Kittredge, and the name stuck. Kit didn't like the name Margaret Mildred anyway. It didn't fit her. It was too flouncy. Kit was not a flouncy girl. Right now, she was feeling especially exasperated with flounces, because the stool she was sitting on was covered with them. Ruthie and the garden club ladies had left, and Kit was finishing her newspaper for Dad. She had to sit with one leg bent under her to reach the typewriter, because the new flouncy stool was as soft as a marshmallow and too low. Kit rolled her newspaper out of the typewriter and read it. She was very pleased with her headline, "The Howards are coming." That ought to get Dad's attention. Under the headline, Kit had written, "Mrs. Howard is in Mother's Garden Club. Mrs. Howard and her XXX son Sterling are going to be staying with the Kittredge family for a while. Mr. Howard is in Chicago. Having the Howards here will be fun, because Sterling can play catch with Kit Kitteridge, the best 9-year-old catcher in Cincinnati. Garden Club trouble. Flock spots put Mrs. Wilmore beside herself." Kit was struggling with her drawing of two Mrs. Wilmores when she heard the car horn's cheery honk honk that signaled her favorite moment of the day. Dad was home from work. Kit snatched up her newspaper, flew downstairs, and burst out the door. "Extra, extra, read all about it!" she shouted, waving her newspaper as Dad climbed out of his car. Dad caught Kit up in his arms. "How's my girl?" he asked. "Great," said Kit when her feet were back down on the ground. "Look, I've got a newspaper for you today." "Oh ho!" said Dad. His blue eyes were twinkly. He smiled a broad smile as he took Kit's newspaper and handed her the real one. He read Kit's headline in a booming voice. "The Howards are coming." Then he glanced at Kit and spoke in his normal voice. "Are they coming for dinner?" "Nope," said Kit. "It's better than that. Read the whole story." Kit watched as Dad's eyes scanned the story. She noticed, much to her surprise, that his smile faded as he read. When Dad spoke, his voice sounded funny, as if he was trying too hard to be hearty. "Well," he said, "this is big news." He gave Kit's hair a gentle tug. "I'm a lucky guy to have my own personal reporter to keep me on top of all the late-breaking stories," he said. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go get the details from your mother." "Grown-ups are funny," Kit thought as she walked along next to Dad. "They don't react the way that you expect them to." Anyone would think that Dad was not pleased to have the Howards coming to stay. But why on earth wouldn't he be? 2 days later, Kit and Ruthie were sitting on the front steps waiting for Sterling and Mrs. Howard to arrive. The girls were reading while they waited. At least, Ruthie was reading. Kit was too distracted. She was really just looking at the pictures in her book. Kit's copy of Robin Hood and His Adventures had belonged to Charlie when he was her age. It had wonderful illustrations, which Kit loved to study. She especially loved reading about the tree houses that Robin and his men lived in. The houses were connected by swinging bridges and catwalks made out of vines. Kit longed to sleep in a tree house high up near the sky, surrounded by leaves. She imagined that at night, stars peeked through the leaves and the wind made the branches sway. Kit had spent many hours drawing plans for a treehouse that she and Ruthie could build. Kit was not very good at sketching. Her drawings always looked like dog houses stuck up in trees. They didn't look anything like the tree houses in Sherwood Forest. "I bet," said Kit, "that Sterling can help us build a tree house." Said Ruthie, with the tiniest hint of irritation at being interrupted when she was deep into the story of Beauty and the Beast. It was hot, and the girls were licking chunks of ice that had been chipped off the big block of ice in the icebox. Kit had her catcher's mitt next to her, too. She wanted Sterling to see right away that she was interested in books and baseball and was not the type of girl who cared only about things like dusting and baking and dresses. Kit's ice chunk had melted to a sliver when, at last, a cab pulled up to the end of the driveway. Kit and Ruthie stood up and waited politely on the front steps. The cab door opened, and Mrs. Howard and a boy got out. When she saw Sterling, Kit felt as if someone had dropped her ice chip down her back, she was so surprised. Ruthie whistled softly. "I thought your mother said that Sterling was about our age," she whispered. "He looks like he's in kindergarten." Sterling stood next to the cab on two of the skinniest legs Kit had ever seen. He was short and pale and skinny all over. His head looked too big for his scrawny neck. The screen door opened, and Mother came out of the house. She stood between Kit and Ruthie and put her hands on their shoulders. "Mother!" whispered Kit indignantly. "Sterling's a shrimp!" "Now, Kit," said Mother, "Sterling is small for his age because his health is delicate, but I'm sure he's a very pleasant fellow." Gently she pushed the girls forward. "Come along, ladies," she said. "Let's go greet our guests and make them feel welcome." Kit and Ruthie and Mother walked down the steps and toward the driveway. Mrs. Howard and the cab driver were unloading boxes and suitcases from the cab. Sterling just stood there. "Oh," said Mrs. Howard, all aflutter. "Margaret, you are such a dear to have us." She turned to Sterling. "Shake hands with Mrs. Kittredge, Lammy," she said, "and say hello to Kit and Ruthie." Sterling shook Mother's hand and nodded at the girls. He looked even worse close up. He had colorless hair, colorless eyes, and a red, runny nose. Kit towered over him, and Ruthie could have made two of him, he was so puny. "Oh, dear," fussed Mrs. Howard. "All this excitement is not good for Sterling, the poor lamb. He'll have to lie down right away and rest." "Of course," said Mother. "Come with me, and we'll get him settled." Kit and Ruthie stood on the driveway and watched as Mrs. Howard and Mother propelled Sterling into the house. The cab driver followed them, carrying an armload of suitcases and boxes. As soon as they were gone, Kit turned to Ruthie and imitated Sterling. She snuffled her nose and made her eyes wide and unblinking. Ruthie giggled, and then she said, "Of course, in fairy tales, you always learn not to judge by appearances. Lots of times, perfectly nice people are under a spell. Think of Beauty and the Beast." But over the next few days, it was clear to Kit that Ruthie's Beauty and the Beast theory didn't work in real life. At least not in Sterling's case. He never said a word. But then he didn't have to. His mother did all the talking, and most of her sentences began with the words, "Sterling can't." When Kit and Ruthie invited Sterling to run through the sprinkler with them, Mrs. Howard said, "Sterling can't be in the sun because his skin is so fair. And Sterling can't run because he has weak lungs. Sterling can't get wet because he might catch a chill. And Sterling can't play in the yard because he's allergic to bee stings." Kit abandoned any idea of Sterling helping with a treehouse or playing catch. Pretty soon, Kit and Ruthie gave up on inviting Sterling to do anything, because the answer was always, "Sterling can't." At first, Kit thought Mrs. Howard was making the whole thing up about how fragile Sterling was. It wasn't as if he had a sickness like rickets or scurvy, or any of the really interesting diseases Kit knew about from reading pirate stories. Sterling didn't even have any spots or rashes. However, after he'd been there a week, Sterling got truly sick. Though it was only a cold, he did have a fever and a terrible cough. Mrs. Howard said that he had to stay in bed and have all his meals brought to him on a tray. Kit could hear Sterling coughing and sniffling and blowing his nose all day long. Everyone had to tiptoe past the door to his room so they wouldn't disturb Sterling in case he was napping. Kit held her nose when she passed by, because the hall outside his room smelled strongly of Vicks Vapo Rub, even though the door was always shut. But one afternoon, Kit noticed that the door to the guest room was open. She sneaked a peek inside. Sterling was propped up on the pillows, and Mrs. Howard was nowhere to be seen. Of course, it was hard to see anything in the room. It was dark because the shades were pulled down. Kit stood in the doorway and looked at Sterling's moon-white face on the pillow. "Gosh, it sure is stuffy in here," Kit said to Sterling. "Don't you want me to open the window or something?" Sterling nodded. Kit opened the window a crack so that a breath of air and a thin line of sunlight came through. "That's better," she said. Kit turned to go. She was halfway to the door when she saw a photograph next to Sterling's bed that stopped her in her tracks. "Hey," she said. "Is that Ernie Lombardi, the catcher for the Reds?" Sterling's round eyes were as unblinking as an owl's as he looked at Kit. His nose was stuffed up, so his voice sounded weirdly low and husky. "Schnoz," he croaked. For a second, Kit didn't understand. Then she laughed and nodded. "Schnoz," she said. "That's Ernie Lombardi's nickname because he has such a big nose." In answer, Sterling blew his nose, which made a nice honking sound. Kit laughed again. "Ernie Lombardi is my favorite player on the Cincinnati Reds," she said. "He's the reason I'm a catcher. Well, and because my dad was a star catcher on his college team. Did you know that Ernie's the biggest guy on the Reds?" "6'3", whispered Sterling hoarsely. 230 pounds. "Right," said Kit, delighted. She rattled on. "It's funny that you like him," she said, "because he's so big and you're so little." "That's why," said Sterling simply. He didn't sound the least bit offended, even though right after she spoke, Kit realized that she'd said something she shouldn't have. "You know what?" said Kit, suddenly inspired. "I have a newspaper article about Ernie Lombardi. It has a photograph of him holding 7 baseballs in one hand at the same time. It used to be tacked up on my wall. My mother wouldn't let me put it back up after my room was painted pink, but I bet I could find it. Want to see it?" Sterling nodded vigorously, and Kit noticed that his eyes weren't colorless at all. They were gray. "Okay," she said. "I'll get the article and you can read all about it." Kit tore back to her room and rummaged through the drawers of her desk. Where was that newspaper article with the photo of Schnoz? She hoped Mother hadn't thrown it away. Scrambling wildly through the bottom drawer, Kit found the scrap of newspaper at last. She raced back to Sterling's room, shouting, "I found it!" Kit flung open the door, and bam! The door hit Mrs. Howard, who was standing right inside with a silver tray in her hands. "My land!" shrieked Mrs. Howard. She lurched forward, and the tray, which had one of Mother's best china teacups and saucers on it, went flying. The hot tea sloshed all over the rug. The cup hit the floor and shattered, and the tray clanged to the ground with a noise like cymbals. Oh dear," fussed Mrs. Howard, and at the same time Sterling started to cough loudly. Kit tried to apologize in a voice louder than his coughs, and Charlie appeared and added to the commotion by asking, "What happened? What's all the noise?" They were all talking at once when Mother came in. "Good gracious," she said above all the racket. "Now what?" Everyone stopped talking, even Mrs. Howard. "Will somebody please tell me what is going on?" asked Mother, not sounding at all like her usual serene self. Everyone looked at Kit. Kit knew that Mother disliked messes, so she tried to explain how this one was just an accident. "I was coming in here to show Sterling my picture of Ernie Lombardi," she said, "and I didn't know that Mrs. Howard was right behind the door. I was in a hurry and Mother held up her hand to stop Kit. "Don't tell me," she said. "I can imagine the rest." She shook her head. "How many times have I told you to slow down and watch where you're going, Kit?" "I'm sorry," said Kit. Mother stooped down to pick up the broken cup. "Just look at what you've done," she said. Kit was shocked. It wasn't like Mother to scold her like this. "But it wasn't my fault," she protested. "It was an accident. It was nobody's fault." "Nobody's fault," repeated Mother. "And yet look at the mess we are in." She looked up at Kit. "Please go now," she said. "I'll help Mrs. Howard clean up. And Kit, dear, please don't barge in here, bothering Sterling and making messes any more." "But I didn't," Kit began. "That's enough, Kit," said Mother. "Go now." Kit gave up. She turned on her heel and stormed back to her room. Mother seemed to think that this mess was all her fault, but it wasn't. She didn't mean to knock into Mrs. Howard. Stupid old Sterling was more to blame for the mess than Kit was. If he weren't sick, his mother wouldn't have been bringing him hot tea in the middle of the afternoon in the first place. Kit flung herself down at the desk and looked at the wrinkled newspaper article in her hand. What did it matter that her photo of Ernie Lombardi holding 7 baseballs was all crumpled up? She couldn't put it up on her new pink walls, and she sure wasn't going to show it to Sterling. She wasn't going to try and be nice to old Sniffle-nosed Sterling ever again. Look at the trouble it caused her. Nothing made Kit more angry than being unjustly accused. She didn't mind a good fair fight, but to be blamed for something that was not her fault, that she could not stand. In books, when people were accused of crimes they didn't commit, someone like Nancy Drew or Dick Tracy always came around and proved they were innocent. Kit could see that in her case, she was going to have to speak for herself. She knew just how to do it, too. She'd write a special newspaper for Dad. Then at least one person would know her side of the story. Kit rolled a piece of paper into the typewriter. In capital letters, she typed her headline. "It's not fair." Chapter 3. It's Not Fair. Pounding the typewriter keys as hard as she could made Kit feel better. The good thing about writing was that she got to tell the whole story without anyone interrupting or contradicting her. Kit was pleased with her article when it was finished. It explained exactly what had happened and how the teacup was broken. Then at the end it said, "Sometimes a person is trying to do something nice for another person, and it turns XXX out sadly badly by mistake. When something bad happens and it isn't anyone's fault, no one should be blamed. It's not fair." Kit pulled her article out of the typewriter and marched outside to sit on the steps and wait for Dad to come home. She brought her book about Robin Hood to read while she waited. She had not been reading long before the screen door squeaked open and slammed shut behind her. Kit didn't even lift her eyes off the page. Charlie sat next to her. "Hi," he said. Kit didn't answer. She was a little put out with Charlie for adding to the trouble in Sterling's room. "What's eating you, sport?" Charlie asked. "Nothing," said Kit as huffily as she could. Charlie looked at the piece of paper next to Kit. "Is that one of your newspapers for Dad?" he asked. "Yep," said Kit. Charlie picked up Kit's newspaper and looked at the headline. "It's not fair," he read aloud. Then he asked, "What's this all about?" "It's about how it's wrong to blame people for things that are not their fault," said Kit. "For example, me for the mess this afternoon." "Aw, come on, Kit," said Charlie. "That's nothing. You shouldn't make such a big deal of it. That's easy for you to say, she said. Charlie took a deep breath in and then let it out. Listen, Kit, he said, in a voice that was suddenly serious. I wouldn't bother Dad with this newspaper today if I were you. Kit slammed her book shut and looked sideways at Charlie. And why not? She asked. Charlie glanced over his shoulder to be sure that no one except Kit would hear him. You know how lots of people have lost their jobs because of the Depression, don't you? He asked. Sure, said Kit, like Mr. Howard. Well, said Charlie, yesterday, Dad told Mother and me that he's closing down his car dealership and going out of business. What? Said Kit. She was horrified. But, she sputtered. But why? Why do you think? Said Charlie. Because nobody has money to buy a car anymore. They haven't for a long time now. Well, how come Dad didn't say anything before this? Kit asked. He didn't want us to worry, said Charlie. And he kept hoping things would get better if he just hung on. He didn't even fire any of his salesmen. He used his own savings to keep paying their salaries. What's Dad going to do now? Asked Kit. I don't know, said Charlie. He even has to give back his own car. He just can't afford it anymore. I guess he'll look for another job, though that's pretty hopeless these days. Kit was sure that Charlie was wrong. Anyone can see that Dad's smart and hardworking, she said. And he has so many friends. People still remember him from when he was a baseball star in college. Plenty of people will be glad to hire him. Charlie shrugged. There just aren't any jobs to be had. Why do you think people are going away? Dad's not going to leave like Mr. Howard did, said Kit, struck by that terrible thought. Then she was struck by another terrible thought. We're not going to lose our house like the Howards, are we? I don't know, said Charlie again. Kit could hardly breathe. It'll be a struggle to keep it, said Charlie. Dad told me that he and Mother don't own the house completely. They borrowed money from the bank to buy it, and they have to pay the bank back a little bit every month. It's called a mortgage. If they don't have enough money to pay the mortgage, the bank can take the house back. Well, the people at the bank won't just kick us out into the street, will they? Asked Kit. Yes, said Charlie. That's exactly what they'll do. You've seen those pictures in the newspapers of whole families and all their belongings out on the street with nowhere to go? That is not going to happen to us, said Kit fiercely. It's not. I hope not, said Charlie. Listen, said Kit. How come Dad told Mother and you about losing his job, but not me? Charlie sighed a huge, sad sigh. Dad told me, he said slowly, because it means that I won't be able to go to college. Oh, Charlie, wailed Kit, full of sympathy and misery. She knew that Charlie had been looking forward to college so much, and now he couldn't go. That's terrible. That's awful. It's not fair. Charlie grinned a cheerless grin and tapped one finger on Kit's newspaper. That's your headline, isn't it? He said. These days, a lot of things happen that aren't fair. There's no one to blame, and there's nothing that can be done about it. Charlie's voice sounded tired, as if he'd grown old all of a sudden. You'd better get used to it, Kit. Life's not like books. There is no bad guy, and sometimes there's no happily ever after, either. At that moment, Kit felt an odd sensation. Things were happening so fast. It was as if a match had been struck inside her, and a little flame was lit, burning like anger, flickering like fear. "Charlie," she asked, "what's going to happen to us?" "I don't know," said Charlie. He stood up to go. "Wait," said Kit. "How come you told me about Dad? Was it just to stop me from bothering Dad with my newspaper?" "No," said Charlie. "No. I told you because—" He paused. "Because you're part of this family, and I figured you deserved to know." "Thanks, Charlie," said Kit. She was grateful to Charlie for treating her like a grown-up. "I'm glad you told me," she said, "even though I wish none of it were true." "Me too," said Charlie. "Me too." After Charlie left, Kit sat on the step thinking. No wonder Dad had not been happy about the Howards coming to stay. He must have been worried about more mouths to feed. And no wonder Mother had been short-tempered today. When she said that even though it was nobody's fault, they were still in a mess, she must have been thinking of Dad. It wasn't his fault that they'd fallen into the terrible, slippery hole of the Depression, and yet, it surely seemed as though they had. Just like the Howards, just like the kids at school, just like the people she'd read about in the newspaper. The sun was setting, but it was still very hot outside. The air was so humid, the whole world looked blurry. Then, all too clearly, Kit saw a terrible sight. It was Dad. He was walking home. He did not see Kit yet, but she could see that he looked hot and tired. There was a discouraged droop to his shoulders that Kit had never seen before. It made Kit's heart twist with sorrow. For just the tiniest second, she did not want to face Dad. She knew that when she did, she'd have to face the truth of all that Charlie had told her. But then Kit stood up and straightened her shoulders. Everything else in the whole world might change for Dad, but she wouldn't. Kit ran to Dad the way she had done every other night of her life when he came home. Dad caught her up and swung her around. When he put her down, Kit looked Dad straight in the eye. "Charlie told me," she said. "Is it true?" Dad knelt down so that his eyes were level with Kit's. "Yes," he said. "It is." "Are we going to be all right?" Kit asked. "I don't know," said Dad. "I truly don't know." Kit threw her arms around Dad and hugged him hard. She crumpled up her newspaper in her fist behind Dad's back. Her complaints about Sterling and the teacup seemed silly and babyish now. Charlie was right. Dad didn't need to read her newspaper. Dad knew all about trying to be nice to people and having it turn out badly. He knew all about having bad things happen that were nobody's fault. He knew all about things that were not fair. Kit was a practical girl. She thought it was a waste of time to worry about a problem when you could be doing something to solve it. But her family had never had a problem as serious as this one before. All night long, Kit lay awake thinking, listening to Sterling cough, and worrying. The night was very hot. Kit kicked her sheets off and turned her pillow over time and time again, because it got sweaty so fast. Finally, Kit got up. It always made her feel better to write. She took her notepad and a pencil out of her desk and sat at the window in the moonlight. She decided to make a list of all the ways she could save the family some money. No dancing lessons. No fancy dresses for dancing lessons. Kit looked at her list and scolded herself. It was all very well to give up dancing lessons and fancy dresses. Those were things she didn't want. But how about the things she did want? Kit looked out the window. Then, sadly, she added to her list. No lumber for a treehouse. No new books. No tickets to baseball games. No sweets. There, thought Kit. I'll show Dad my list tomorrow. But by the time Kit went downstairs to breakfast the next morning, Dad had already left. He's gone to meet a business friend, said Mother. It'd be great if his friend offered Dad a job, wouldn't it? Said Kit. Yes, said Mother. It would. She smiled, but it wasn't one of her real smiles. Kit felt all restless and jumpy. She wanted to be alone so that she could think and work on her list some more. She wandered around the yard for a while before she found a good hideaway under the back porch. No one will find me here, she thought. But she had not been hidden long before Ruthie crawled in next to her. How do you always find me? Asked Kit. Ruthie shrugged. It's easy, she said. I just think where I'd be if I were you, and that's where you are. Why are you hiding, by the way? My dad lost his job, said Kit. Oh, said Ruthie softly. That's too bad. I'm sorry. The girls sat together in silence for a minute. That was a good thing about Ruthie. She'd sit and think with Kit. She didn't need to talk all the time. What are you going to do? Ruthie asked at last. Kit handed Ruthie her list. These are ways I can help save money, she said. Ruthie read the list. These are good, she said. These'll help. But her voice sounded doubtful. Kit sighed. The truth is, I've just never given money much thought before, she said. I know, said Ruthie. Me neither. Kit understood that when Dad sold a car, people gave him money. Dad gave some of the money to Mother. She used it to buy food and clothes, and to pay the electric bill and the iceman, and to get things for the house. Once a month, Dad paid the bank $25, which, as Charlie had explained, was part of the money that Dad and Mother owed the bank because they'd borrowed it when they bought the house. If there was any money left over after everything was paid, Dad put it in his savings account at the bank. Without Dad's job, said Kit to Ruthie, there won't be any more money coming in. And Charlie said that Dad used up most of his savings to pay his salesman as long as he could, so soon there won't be any money left in his savings. What'll we do then? I've read lots of books about people who have no money, said Ruthie. Me too, said Kit. But most of them lived in the olden days on farms or in a forest where they could at least get nuts and berries. We live in modern times, in Cincinnati. How will we get food when our money is gone? Will we move to a farm? I don't think your mother would like that, said Ruthie. No, sighed Kit. Besides, none of us knows anything about farming. Ruthie scratched her knee. I think, she said slowly, we're going to have to hope that your dad gets another job. Yup, said Kit. Maybe today. She looked at Ruthie. What a great headline that would be. Chapter 4. Mother's Brainstorm. But Dad didn't get a job that day, or the day after that, or the day after that, though he certainly seemed to be trying. Every day he put on a good suit and rode the trolley car downtown. Every day he said he was going to have lunch with a friend or a business acquaintance. Every day Kit hoped he'd come home with the good news of a new job. But every afternoon Dad came home tired and discouraged. All the bad news in the newspapers seemed to be about Kit's own life now. One afternoon, after a week had passed, Kit and Mother were on the back porch shelling peas when a huge black car pulled up in the driveway. "Oh no," sighed Mother. Kit asked, "Is it Uncle Hendrik?" Mother nodded. She took off her apron and handed it and the peas to Kit. "Quick," she said, "take these into the kitchen. And Kit, dear, while you're in there, pour us some iced tea and bring it to the terrace." Mother smoothed her hair, adjusted her smile, and walked gracefully toward the car. Kit was glad to escape inside. Uncle Hendrik was her mother's uncle, and the oldest relative Mother had left. He was tall and gray, and he lived in a tall gray house near downtown Cincinnati. He always seemed to be in a bad mood, like Grandfather in the Heidi book before Heidi made him nice. The last thing Uncle Hendrik needs is lemon, Kit thought as she put a slice in his glass. He's already a sourpuss. Kit put the iced tea on a tray and carried it to the terrace. Mother was sitting on a wicker chair, but Uncle Hendrik was pacing back and forth. When he saw Kit, he stops. "Here it comes," thought Kit. Without even saying hello, Uncle Hendrik barked at Kit. "What's the capital of North Dakota?" "Bismarck," answered Kit. She was used to such questions from Uncle Hendrik. If he wasn't asking her about capitals, he was asking her multiplication facts. Worst of all were his word problems. "I have 2 bushels of Brussels sprouts. I'm selling for 5 cents a peck," he said now. "How much do you pay me?" Kit put the tray on the table to gain some time. She could never keep bushels and pecks straight. And who wants 2 bushels of Brussels sprouts anyway, she thought. 50 cents? She guessed. "Wrong," said Uncle Hendrik. "You may go." Mother gave Kit a sympathetic look. But Kit felt sorrier for Mother than she did for herself. She went inside, but she stayed in the dining room where she could hear everything they said. "Margaret," Uncle Hendrik sighed. "Didn't I tell you and Jack what a mistake it was to sink all your money into that car dealership? If you two had listened to me, you would not be in the fix you are in now. And don't expect me to help you. I won't throw good money after bad." "We'll be all right, Uncle," said Mother. "I'm sure Jack will find a job soon." "Huh!" snorted Uncle Hendrik. "No, he will not. Not him. And not during these hard times." Kit realized that her fists were clenched. Oh, she wanted to run out onto the porch and punch Uncle Hendrik. She hated when he spoke about Dad that way. But Mother didn't say anything. "And what will you do in the meantime?" Uncle Hendrik continued. "You should sell this house right away. Though who'd buy, I can't imagine. Such a foolish extravagance to buy it in the first place. You must owe the bank thousands of dollars." "This is our home, Uncle," Kit heard Mother say. "We'll do whatever we can to keep it." "Indeed," said Uncle Hendrik. "And what might that be, if I may ask?" Mother didn't answer. "Just as I thought," said Uncle Hendrik smugly. "You haven't any idea. There's nothing you can do." "Well," said Mother, "we could take in boarders, paying guests." Kit felt as surprised as Uncle Hendrik sounded. "Boarders?" he gasped. "Yes," said Mother. "It's perfectly respectable. We'll take in teachers or nurses from the hospital." Gosh, thought Kit, would you listen to Mother? But Uncle Hendrik had evidently heard enough. "Well, Margaret," he said, "all I can say is that if my sister, your dear mother, could see you now, it would break her heart." With that, Uncle Hendrik strode back to his car and drove away. Kit ventured out onto the terrace. "Are we really going to take in boarders?" she asked Mother. Mother smiled, and this time it was one of her real smiles that made Kit feel like smiling too. "I surprised myself by saying that," said Mother. "I'm afraid I just wanted to shock Uncle Hendrik, but I rather like the idea." Mother laughed. "Yes," she said, "I like the idea a lot. It was a brainstorm." "What's Dad going to say?" asked Kit. "That," said Mother, "is a good question." Kit was not at all sure that she liked Mother's brainstorm. She wasn't crazy about the idea of strangers living in their house, especially considering the way Sterling had turned out. Kit could tell that Dad didn't like the idea either. Mother had first presented the idea to him in private, of course, before she spoke about it again at dinner that evening. Mrs. Howard was serving Sterling his dinner up in their room, so only the family was at the table. "We have plenty of room," said Mother. "We should put it to use." "I don't think it's necessary," said Dad. "I'm making every effort to find a job. Meanwhile, this will be a way for us to earn some money," said Mother. Dad sighed. "I hate the idea of you waiting on other people, especially in our own home." "Well, I'll chip in to help," answered Mother, in a way that made it clear that the question of taking in boarders was settled. Kit wasn't surprised. There was never any way to stop Mother once she'd made up her mind. "But where will all the boarders stay?" asked Kit. "Charlie can move to the sleeping porch," said Mother, "and we can put someone in his room." "It's okay with me," said Charlie with a shrug. "Thank you, dear," said Mother. "I'm also planning to find 2 school teachers or nurses to share the guest room." Kit perked up. "Does that mean Sterling and his mother will be leaving?" she asked. That would be one good thing about Mother's plan at least. "They'll stay," said Mother. "They'll be paying guests from now on." "But where will they stay?" asked Kit. Mother looked at Kit and said calmly, "Sterling and his mother will move into your room." "Mine?" asked Kit in a shocked, squeaky voice. "Yes," said Mother. "We need them. They've got to stay if we want to make enough money to pay the mortgage every month. I figured it out." "But, Mother," exclaimed Kit, "where will I sleep?" "I was thinking," said Mother briskly, "that you could move up to the attic. There's plenty of room up there." "The attic?" thought Kit indignantly. She was being exiled to the hot, stuffy attic so that Sniffle-Nosed Sterling could move into her room with his hankies and his meals on trays and his Vicks Vapor Rub. Oh, oh, oh! In Kit's mind, she saw her headline again, in letters that were 4 inches tall. "It's not fair." "But Kit," panted Ruthie, out of breath from climbing the stairs up to the attic, "you don't even like your room that much." It was the next day. Kit and Ruthie were inspecting the attic. It smelled of mothballs, and it was gloomy because the windows were so dusty that the sun couldn't shine through them. "You told me your room is too pink," Ruthie said. "Why are you so mad about moving out of it?" "Because it was mine," said Kit, knowing she sounded peevish. The fact that Ruthie was right, of course, just made Kit madder. "That room belonged to me, always, ever since I was a baby. And it just kills me to think that Sterling gets to have it. Why doesn't he move up here?" "Why doesn't he have to move up here?" "I guess because his mother is paying rent now," said Ruthie calmly. She looked around. "It's not so bad up here," she said. "It's like the attic that Sarah Crewe had to move into after she lost all her money. You know, in The Little Princess." Kit felt very impatient with Ruthie and her princesses this morning. Sarah Crew's room was transformed for her by that Indian guy, Kit said crossly. Remember? He made it beautiful. He was practically magic about it. Your mother's practically magic about making things beautiful, too, said Ruthie. She'll help you up here, right? Right, said Kit. But she was dead wrong. That afternoon, while she was helping Mother make the beds, Kit asked her how they were going to fix up the attic. Mother said, I don't have time to help you right now, dear. I'm far too busy getting the rooms ready for the boarders. Mother's arms were full of sheets for the rollaway cot, which was being moved into Kit's old room for Sterling to sleep on. After you help me, why don't you just poke around up there, she said. See what you can find. Mother spoke in such a distracted manner that Kit's feelings were hurt. Mother had been so particular about every detail in Kit's pink room. But she didn't seem to give a hoot about Kit's attic. Kit climbed slowly up the stairs to the attic. She stood in the middle of the room and looked around at the lumpy, dusty piles that surrounded her. In a far corner, she saw her old brown desk chair. She saw her old desk, too, hidden under a bumpy mattress and some boxes. Kit knelt next to one of the boxes and looked inside. Now, if I were in a book, Kit thought, I'd find something wonderful in here. But the box only had junk in it. A broken camera, a pair of binoculars, and a compass that must have belonged to Dad in the war. A gooseneck lamp, and an old telephone, the kind that looked like a daffodil. Old and useless, thought Kit. She took the compass out of the box and hung it around her neck. Then she sank down to the floor, overwhelmed by sadness. When she'd been wishing for change so that she could have a dramatic headline, she'd never imagined this. Terrible changes, and so many, and so fast. Dad had lost his job, she had lost her room, and in a way, they were going to lose their house. They'd still be living in it, but it wouldn't be the same when it was filled up with strangers. Nothing would ever be the same. Kit almost cried. She bit her lip now and fought back tears. Then, suddenly, Sterling's head appeared at the top of the stairs. "What are you doing out of bed?" Kit asked, roughly brushing away a tear. Kit could tell that Sterling knew she'd been crying, but all he said was, "I'm bringing this stuff from your room." He came all the way up the stairs and handed Kit a box. She noticed that the photo of Ernie Lombardi, wrinkled but smoothed flat, was on top. "Thanks," said Kit. "I brought you a tack, too," said Sterling. He gave Kit the tack and looked around. "I guess you can put Ernie Lombardi up anywhere you want to up here, can't you?" he said in his weirdly husky voice. Then he disappeared down the stairs. After Sterling left, Kit looked down at the photograph. She felt oddly cheered to see it. Old Sniffle-nosed Sterling is right, she thought. I guess I can put anything, anywhere I want up here. Kit looked around the long, narrow attic. The ceiling was steeply pitched. There were regular windows at each end of the room, and dormer windows that jutted out of the roof and made pointy-roofed alcoves, each one about as wide as Kit was tall. The windows went almost all the way to the floor of the alcoves. Kit managed to open one of the heavy windows. She knelt down, stuck her head out, and came face to face with a leafy tree branch. At that moment, Kit got a funny, excited feeling. Suddenly, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Over the next few days, Kit was glad that no one seemed to care what she was up to, up in the attic. When she wasn't helping Mother downstairs, she hauled buckets of soapy water up there and scrubbed the windows till they sparkled. She swept the floor and pushed the boxes far to one end of the room. She had decided to use only half of the attic to live in, and to pile junk in the other half. Finally, the cleaning was done, and the fun part began. In one alcove, Kit put her roll-top desk and her swivel chair. She put the gooseneck lamp on the desk, along with the telephone, the camera, and her typewriter. That was her newspaper office alcove. In another alcove, Kit tacked up her photo of Ernie Lombardi. On a nail, she hung her catcher's mitt and the old binoculars. She figured she might need the binoculars if she ever went to a Reds game. That was her baseball alcove. In the third alcove, Kit made bookshelves out of boards and arranged all her books on them. She found a huge chair that was losing its stuffing, and she shoved it into the alcove and softened it with a pillow. That was her reading alcove. The last alcove was Kit's favorite. She put the lumpy mattress on an old bed frame and pushed the bed into the alcove with the pillow near the window. She surrounded the bed with some of Mother's potted plants. That was her treehouse alcove. The very first night Kit slept in her treehouse alcove, Mother came up to tuck her in. She sat on the edge of Kit's bed and looked around the attic. Kit watched Mother's face carefully. She knew the attic was a far cry from Mother's idea of what a girl's room should look like. "Well," said Mother at last, "a place for every interest, and every interest in its place. I can see that you've worked hard to make this attic your room. I'm proud of you, Kit." "Thanks," said Kit. "I'm sorry I haven't had time to help you," said Mother. "I'm afraid I've left you all on your own." "That's okay," said Kit. Mother kissed Kit's forehead. Then she picked up Kit's book. "Still reading Robin Hood?" she asked. "Yep," said Kit. "Robin Hood gave me the idea to make a treehouse alcove to sleep in." Kit also had plans for a swinging bridge to connect the window ledge to the tree just outside the window, but she didn't tell Mother. It was going to be a secret escape, like Robin Hood had. "Good old Robin Hood," said Mother, "robbing the rich to give to the poor." Kit propped herself up on her elbows and looked at Mother. "Too bad there isn't any Robin Hood today," she said. "If rich people had to give some of their money to the poor, it would make the Depression better." "It would help," said Mother, "but I don't think it would end the Depression." "What will?" asked Kit. "I don't know," said Mother. "Lots of things, I suppose. People will have to work hard, use what they have, face challenges, stay hopeful." She looked around Kit's attic and smiled. "I guess they'll have to do sort of what you've done up here in your attic. They'll have to make changes and realize that changes can be good." Then she kissed Kit again. "Good night, dear," she said. "Don't read too late." "I won't," said Kit. "Good night." After Mother went downstairs, Kit flipped over onto her stomach and looked out the open window. She could hear the leaves rustling outside and see stars peeking through the branches. "Changes can be good," she thought. "That sounds like a headline to me."